Have you ever felt like you entered a desert and got stuck there for far too long? It's not just exhaustion. It's that gut-wrenching feeling that even God has forgotten your story. You pray, fast, read the Bible, but nothing changes. Everything stays exactly where it is, or worse, it seems to spiral further out of control. But what if I told you that silence isn't abandonment? What if that dry, cracked ground in your soul is exactly where God is working the most? Because not every process is punishment. Some are construction. And believe me, you will not leave this desert the same. Some people think faith is about living on a mountaintop all the time. But the truth is, the deepest faith is born when everything collapses. When religion stops being inheritance and becomes survival. When prayer becomes the only breath left in your lungs. And in that moment, God doesn't show up as a quick-fix miracle worker. He shows up as the one who walks with you, step by step. He doesn't drag you out of the desert. He transforms you within it, because the greatest miracle isn't escaping a hard place. It's coming out of it changed. In this video, we're going to talk about something few people have the courage to admit. The desert has a purpose, and yes, there are signs, shifts, answers, and even rewards in the midst of pain. We'll walk together through a real-life journey of crisis, prayer, divine intervention, and transformation. This isn't theory, it's real life. And if you think God is taking too long, maybe it's because He's still preparing the version of you that will come out of this process stronger, wiser, and full of unshakable faith. So stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear won't just strengthen you, it might change the way you see your own path. And hey, if this message speaks to your heart, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications. Every single day there's a new video here to remind you God hasn't forgotten you. And He's still writing stories no one can erase. She no longer knew what to do. It felt like the ground had vanished beneath her and everything around her was spinning out of control. The days grew heavier and heavier, and even though she forced smiles on social media, her soul was crying out for help. It wasn't just a rough patch anymore. It was like being locked in an emotional prison, chained down, unable to dream, to believe, or even move forward. And it was there, at the tightest, darkest place in her journey, that she finally looked up. Not in rebellion, but in the broken cry of someone who'd realized either God steps in or nothing else matters. This wasn't just sadness. It was the undeniable sense of being stuck in a humanly impossible situation. Her exact words. There was no logical way out. No influential contact to call, no plan B scribbled on paper. And when human resources run dry, that's when faith becomes the only currency that still holds value. Prayer stopped being routine and became survival. Religion was no longer just a family tradition. It became the last thread connecting her story to heaven. And the Bible, once read out of habit, became the only place where she could find breath. She didn't ask for a sign. She begged for a rescue. Her words weren't poetic. They were raw, desperate, spoken through tears in her pillow and whispers in the shower. Jesus, change. This, get me out, do something. And even without immediate answers, something invisible began to stir. Because when the soul reaches rock bottom, it also finds a place only God can hear. And it was in that place that the impossible began to be challenged by relentless prayer. This turning point didn't come overnight. There were no angels descending with swords or thunder rumbling from the skies, but there were small miracles that, to the outside eye, might have seemed like mere coincidence. Yet to the one who prays, they are unmistakable silent answers. The first was peace, a kind of calm with no logical reason for being there, but it came anyway. Then came direction, a verse, a phrase from a friend, a random video that popped up at the perfect time. It was like God was putting together a puzzle inside her. and each piece came with a whisper, "I'm here." This story isn't about a strong woman, it's about a present God, because what she experienced wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a reconstruction of faith. And the most beautiful part, she didn't want to keep it to herself. When everything settled, she chose to share it, and her testimony became a beacon for those still lost in the dark. But what happens inside the soul of someone who reaches the point of declaring, humanly, it was impossible? That's exactly what we're going to uncover next. She looked at her situation and knew, without a shadow of doubt, that nothing, absolutely nothing, could be done through human means. The numbers didn't add up, the diagnosis didn't change, the doors remained shut. And it's no exaggeration to say that each failed attempt only made the weight on her shoulders heavier. That's when she repeated the phrase like a lament, because humanly speaking, it's impossible. It wasn't just a logical statement, it was the exact moment where despair carved out space for something beyond reason to enter. Faith. Something happens inside the mind in moments like this. Science calls it a psychic rupture, when logic breaks and the heart begins to cry out for answers that aren't in textbooks, but maybe in the pages of the Bible. It's in that abyss between pain and hope that we discover prayer as the soul's living language. Religion, far from formulas, becomes the only place of emotional and spiritual refuge. God, who once seemed distant, suddenly becomes the only name capable of offering comfort. It's as if suffering forces the soul to look up. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, said that human beings can endure any pain as long as they find a why. And maybe, for those sinking fast, that why is exactly the search for God. Not as an escape, but as a reconnection with what brings meaning. In this context, Jesus isn't just a religious figure. He's the silent friend who grabs the hand of someone hanging by a thread. And prayer, in moments like this, isn't a spiritual routine. It's the soul's only breath left. When she realized she couldn't change anything, she also realized she could surrender everything. And that's when the real transformation began. Surrendering isn't giving up, it's trusting. And trust is such a radical inner movement that it's sometimes harder than fighting. But curiously, it's this kind of surrender that opens doors no one else can. Because when we acknowledge the impossible, we make space for the supernatural. That's the moment when despair becomes a bridge instead of a prison. After all, if we only believe when everything is possible, then that's not faith, it's calculation. But when everything feels lost and someone still bends the knee, closes their eyes and says, "God, I still trust you," something shifts. Not on the outside, but inside. And it's in that internal space that the silent revolution of every miracle story begins. But what makes that kind of faith stay alive, even without immediate signs? That's what leads us to the next stage. She didn't pray once and wait for a miracle to drop from the sky. What happened was different. It was as if, with each new day, her soul found new words to cry out, even if it was just, "Help me, God." And there's something profoundly spiritual about that. Because the power of prayer isn't in eloquence but in consistency. When prayer becomes daily practice, faith stops being a concept and becomes sustenance. The Bible doesn't say the righteous live by result, but by faith. And real faith insists, even in the dark. Prayer isn't a button we push to make God move. It's an open channel between human pain and divine mercy. And she learned that the hard way, through the skin, through time, through silence. Some days she prayed while crying, some days she prayed exhausted, and other days she didn't even have strength. She simply sat still and let her heart speak. Because there are moments when the most powerful prayer is the breath that says, "I still believe." James 5:16 doesn't say just any prayer works. It says, "The fervent prayer of the righteous is powerful and effective." And fervor isn't shouting, it's surrender. It's that stubborn faith that says, God, I won't stop until I see your hand. And that's how she lived, not out of ritual, but as a means of emotional and spiritual survival. Religion, once formal, became her source. Prayer was oxygen. Without it, everything suffocated. With it, hope was renewed even without visible signs. The kind of prayer that changes stories isn't the one that convinces God. It's the one that transforms the one who prays. And that's what happened to her. Little by little, without even realizing it, she was changing on the inside. Despair gave way to sensitivity. Fear gave way to trust. And with every prayer, her soul gained invisible muscles, strengthened faith. And the curious thing, nothing had changed on the outside yet. But inside, she was no longer the same woman. It was as if God was preparing the vessel before pouring out the answer. What keeps someone praying even when there are no signs? That kind of faith can't be explained. It must be lived. And it was that faith that caused her not only to persist, but to become more attentive. Because as the days passed, signs began to appear, discreet, subtle, but real. And when the heart is in constant prayer, it recognizes when God is trying to speak. And that's exactly what we'll explore in the next section. In the midst of chaos, something began to change. Not the facts, not the circumstances, but her eyes. They started to see differently. A verse that once went unnoticed now leapt off the page like a direct answer. A simple conversation with a co-worker sounded like divine counsel. An old song hit differently, like the lyrics were written just for her. And that's exactly how God speaks to those who pray. Not through thunder, but through details. And to someone who walks by faith, details are never random. They're signs. There's something the Bible teaches us over and over. God speaks, but he doesn't shout. He communicates in silence, through moments, through pauses, through people and patterns. Religion teaches us to search for divine answers, but it's prayer that tunes the soul's ear to recognize heaven's whisper. Sometimes the answer you've been waiting for comes disguised as a gentle no, a door that won't open, or a discomfort that stirs your spirit. And when your heart is tuned in, even God's no can be seen as protective love. She learned to ask specific questions in prayer, and that changed everything. Instead of praying, God, speak to me, she began saying, Lord, if it's your will, show me clearly today. And that very day, someone would send her a verse, or a video would pop up with the exact theme she had just prayed about. Sounds like coincidence, until it happens 3 or more times. And when you start seeing that pattern, reason goes quiet, and the soul realizes this is God responding. But here's a warning. If you're not emotionally grounded, you can ignore or even misread the signs. Some people see divine messages in everything and confuse emotion with direction. That's why sincerity and discernment are both essential in prayer. God never contradicts himself. He won't send a sign that goes against the Bible or the character of Jesus. If what you felt leads you away from love, peace, or truth, then it didn't come from him. But when it's truly from God, your soul knows. It brings direction, not confusion. She started writing the signs down. She kept a small journal where she recorded the verses, emotions, and events that felt like responses. And as she looked back, she saw a thread of divine care running through every detail. God had been speaking all along. She just hadn't noticed. But now, she was listening. And what happens when we begin to follow those signs? What happens when heaven starts moving and the impossible finally begins to bend? That's what we'll discover next. Suddenly, something happened. The news she had been desperately waiting for arrived without warning. The answer came through an email, the phone rang, the outcome changed. What once seemed tattooed into reality, the impossible, bowed to divine intervention. But the most striking part wasn't the what happened, it was the how. It came in a way no one expected, through an unlikely route at the strangest moment. It was as if God whispered, "It's me, not logic." And in that instant, she knew. Her prayer had reached heaven. The shift was so overwhelming that she couldn't believe it at first. She had to reread the message, ask again, look around to see if it was really happening, because when you've waited a long time, even the blessing feels unreal. Faith prepares the heart, but even a ready heart can be caught off guard. The Bible is full of moments like that, like Peter being freed from prison or the sea parting for Moses. These are stories that prove God is never late. He's just waiting for the moment when it's undeniably his hand at work. And you know what's most curious? Before everything changed on the outside, something had already changed on the inside. She was no longer in despair. She was at peace. That peace was like a divine carpet laid out in preparation for the shift. This is a spiritual pattern. External miracles begin with internal faith. Jesus always asked, "Do you believe?" before performing miracles. And when she said, even silently, "Yes, I believe," the situation responded with God's amen. But that turning point wasn't just a personal win. She realized there was a greater purpose behind it all. It wasn't just about getting out of the crisis. It was about coming out transformed. Her prayer shifted from cries for help to words of gratitude. Her despair turned into memory. Her pain became a bridge. What once was a wound turned into a scar with a story. And some victories aren't meant to be celebrated in silence. They're meant to be shared in faith. Her life changed. But that wasn't the end, because miracles don't end when they happen. They continue through the people who are touched by the testimony, and that's what sparked something new in her heart, a desire to use her story as a seed. After all, if God did it for her, could he not do it for someone else too? And that new purpose would give even more meaning to what comes next. She could have gone back to living her life normally after the breakthrough. After all, the storm had passed, the answer had come, the pain had lifted. But something inside her wouldn't let her move on like nothing happened. It was as if God himself whispered, "Don't keep this to yourself." That's when her testimony became a tool. That intimate experience, lived out in the secrecy of prayer, was now turning into a living word to reach others still stuck in their own deserts. And that in itself is a clear sign of spiritual maturity. Turning victory into mission. It started with simple conversations. She shared her story with a friend and saw tears well up in their eyes. Then came WhatsApp voice notes, social media posts, invitations to speak in prayer groups. Before she knew it, she was being used. Religion, once her place of refuge, was now also her field of action. God took what had been pain and transformed it into purpose, into ministry. And that doesn't require a pulpit or a spotlight, just a heart that's willing. The impact was real and visible. People on the edge of giving up would hear her story and find strength again. Those who had stopped believing in miracles began to pray once more. Young people who had seen faith as something distant began to wonder, what if God is still listening? All because someone dared to open their heart and tell what Jesus had done. That's why the Bible values testimony so deeply. It's a bridge between pain and hope. She realized that multiplying the miracle wasn't just about speaking, it was also about listening, supporting, extending her hand. She began walking alongside others, praying with them, and teaching what she had learned in the valley. And suddenly, her desert became a path for others to walk with less pain. That once impossible situation became a classroom. Suffering became a tool. What once felt like punishment turned into calling. Because God never wastes a tear, he turns each one into seeds of transformation. And the most incredible part? The more she shared, the stronger her own faith became. It was as if, by retelling her journey, she began to understand God's care in even greater detail. That ignited a new fire inside her. Because what begins in pain and ends in testimony can start all over again in someone else's life. But there's a pattern that reveals this entire process, almost like a spiritual roadmap, and that's exactly what we'll draw next. If what happened to her were to be drawn, it would look like a river, starting off narrow and dark, but gaining light and width as it flows. First comes the chaos, the human crisis, that feeling of free fall, not knowing where you'll land. Then the intense cry, not just any prayer, but the soul's desperate scream that reaches heaven. Next come the signs, small, subtle, yet precise. Then comes the intervention, God's invisible hand shifting everything. And finally, transformation and testimony. Each step a lesson, each pain a link, each victory a mission. This isn't a magic formula, but it reveals a spiritual pattern that's repeated in countless biblical stories. Joseph went through the pit, the prison, the silence, then the throne. Hannah endured ridicule, prayed in anguish, made a sincere vow. And then came the miracle. Every stage demands something: faith in the crisis, patience in prayer, sensitivity to the signs, courage in the waiting, and generosity in sharing. It's not about getting to the end quickly. It's about living each phase with intention. In the crisis stage, the biggest challenge is staying grounded. It's about holding on to emotional clarity when everything around you feels like it's unraveling. In the phase of crying out, the key is sincerity. God doesn't respond to rehearsed speeches. He responds to torn hearts. When signs begin to appear, discernment is essential, and that only comes from intimacy with Him. And when intervention arrives, the challenge shifts. Now it's about trusting the new, even if it feels scary. Because many times, the miracle comes wrapped in discomfort. But the most neglected and perhaps most powerful step is the sharing. Because that's when your story stops being just yours. It's when the pain lived by one begins to heal many. When a miracle witnessed by a single life reignites faith in others. So if you're somewhere in this process, whatever the phase, remember this: every stage holds a key, and every key opens a door to a deeper level of intimacy with God. Prayer isn't just a reaction to pain, it's the construction of divine purpose. She didn't just feel this, she mapped it. Yes, she wrote it down, drew it out, organized the journey. She turned the path into a teaching. Because when we understand the process, we're more patient with it. And maybe, just maybe, if you start seeing your life through this lens, from impossible to testimony, you'll be able to breathe better in the middle of the path. But how can we apply these lessons in a practical way? What actions can make this journey more intentional? That's exactly what we'll unpack next. The first great lesson is both simple and freeing. Recognize your own limits. Through pain, she learned she couldn't control everything, and that wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. So many people live trapped by anxiety because they demand immediate results, quick answers, and visible solutions. But when we accept that some battles are spiritual and require full surrender to God, the weight starts to lift. Faith replaces control, prayer replaces panic. The Bible shows this time and again. God moves when we stop trying to be Him. The second lesson is about persistence. Persevering in prayer is more than a practice. It's a daily decision. It means continuing to pray even when absolutely nothing seems to change. Jesus used parables to teach this, like the one about the persistent widow. Faith isn't measured by volume, but by constancy. She put this into practice by creating a prayer routine. If you want to do the same, pick a fixed time, a quiet place, and start. 10 minutes a day of sincere, focused prayer can shift the atmosphere of your soul. Another essential lesson is to pay attention to the signs. They won't come with flashing lights, but a verse might burn in your heart. A conversation might hit differently. A phrase in a video might be the confirmation. That's why journaling everything becomes a powerful tool. Grab a notebook and write, what moved you today? What phrase repeated itself? What feeling stuck with you after prayer? God speaks to those who listen, but listening takes focus, practice, and spiritual sensitivity. Valuing the shift, no matter how small, is also a sign of spiritual maturity. Not every divine intervention comes with fireworks. Sometimes it's just an unexplainable peace. Other times it's a closed door, and later you realize it was a rescue in disguise. Prayer isn't just for asking for miracles, it's for asking for discernment. And when we start seeing even silence as a form of response, our faith grows up. At that point, religion stops being ritual and becomes relationship, and that's where the impossible starts to loosen. Finally, sharing what you've lived is like blowing on embers in hearts gone cold. She witnessed this time and again. A simple testimony could reignite someone's faith. If you're going through something difficult right now, remember, your victory won't be just yours. It will be fuel for someone else. So record your journey, post it, speak it, send a message. As Jesus said, no one lights a lamp and hides it under the bed. Your story carries light, and maybe, just maybe, it's time to see how it connects with the stories around you, even across different expressions of faith. Now let me ask you, what are you going to do with everything you just heard? Will you keep seeing the desert as punishment, or will you start viewing it as a spiritual classroom? Will you keep murmuring, or will you turn your prayer into a cry of faith that breaks through the heavens? Because the truth is, what you've just learned can't die inside you. This message needs to become action, and action begins with a decision to choose to see God right in the middle of what once looked like nothing but suffering. Maybe you're still waiting for a big dramatic sign, but have you considered that the sign could be this very word you're hearing now? Maybe what you call the end is actually the middle of your process. So don't retreat. Take a deep breath. Pray again. Start writing your story, tracking the signs, paying attention to the answers heaven has been sending, disguised as ordinary moments. God is not silent. He's training your ears. And whoever learns to hear in the silence will recognize his voice even through the noise. And before you leave, let me challenge you with something. What part of this message spoke to your heart the most? Drop it in the comments. Sometimes, what touched you is exactly what will heal someone else still in the middle of their fight. And if this word gave you strength, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who's also walking through their own desert. Don't hide this light. Someone needs what you just received, and remember, testimonies multiply when they're shared. Be part of that ripple. If this message touched your soul, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you don't miss out on more faith-building content. Drop a like and share this word with someone who needs to hear it. God bless you. Leave this in the comments. I won't leave this desert the way I came in. And let your faith speak. Oh, and come back tomorrow. There's a new video here every day. And one of them might be exactly what your soul has been needing to hear.